All right, we are live some places. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the individual co-hosts and do not reflect the official policy or position of the Firearms Radio Network and or their employers. Viewer discretion is advised. This is especially true on live shows. If you like what we're doing and would like to help support the show, visit patreon.com/afteractionproject. If you'd like to throw us some free support and appreciation, we would greatly appreciate a 5-star review on iTunes or anywhere you listen to this podcast. And then tonight's episode, just like every episode, is brought to you by the Firearms Radio Network. Be sure to check out the other great podcasts on the Firearms Radio Network by visiting firearms-related.net. I believe their podcast intros over there are less redundant than ours, and they have a bunch of great shows over there. So tonight, episode 93, we are joined by Phillip Groff of Vigr Training and Kent Hauer of Green Mountain Defense. We're going to be talking about the Vigr Training's vehicle course. Your hosts tonight are Andy and myself. If you don't know anything about us, go back and listen to episode 17. We do a deep dive into our personal lives and all that good stuff. It's a great episode. Enjoy it. Cool. Let's get into it. Phil, introduce yourself to our listeners. Talk to us a little bit about what got you into the firearms training industry and a little bit about Vigr Training.
Yeah, awesome. So my name is Phil Groff. I am Vigr Training. I joke around with all my students and training partners. If I say we are us at any point this evening, it's just me trying to sound like a bigger company. So Vigr Training is me. This is going into now 2024, so that will make it my 28th, 29th year that I've been getting paid to have a gun in my hand and in some way, shape, or form teach somebody something about it. So start off in the Marine Corps. I was back in the 90s. Wasn't much going on in the 90s. You know, Clinton was president. We were rattling our sabers. I was in an anti-terrorism unit, which sounds a lot cooler than it really is. Jumped out, pretty much figured out in the Marine Corps that I enjoyed teaching. We got sent to a lot of schools, did a lot of shooting, and we were expected to bring it back. So that was where it started. Got out of the Marine Corps, went into law enforcement, and I'm in my 24th year now. I'm a part-time cop, very, very part-time, like a couple shifts a year to maintain my certification, and that's about it. But I did that full-time tilt for 14 years. Jumped into the private sector in the gun industry, worked that a few years, and then started my own thing. It's coming up to be 6 years this June. Yeah, with Vigr Training full time. So private training game, jumped into that, started in 2004. So as I was a cop, jumped in, worked for some local companies first, ended up working a couple larger national companies, working contract, civilian open enrollment training up through military contracts, getting folks ready to go overseas. So kind of ran the gamut of private citizen, law enforcement, military, PMCs, played that training game through the GWAT era. A lot of contracts available from a lot of companies. So did that. And that brings me to here and now, Vigr Training. So this is my full-time gig. I'm real fortunate and real lucky to travel the country and train law enforcement, military, and armed citizens. My biggest clientele base is in law enforcement. That's where I have my most, I don't want to say notoriety, but most recognizable name would be in law enforcement training. But open enrollment has been there with me the entire time. I tell people, hey, at the end of the day, I'm an armed citizen. I'm an armed American. Before I'm a cop, before I was in the military, I mean, that's what I was. That's at the core and the base of it. So that'll always be there in the training. So that is my full-time gig. That keeps me pretty busy and fortunate to travel the country and have gun will travel. Kind of the great American firearms trainer story. So that's the quick version. That's the nutshell. Ken can tell you the normal elevator speech version, which my understanding of elevator speech and real elevator speech is vary greatly as mine rides to about the 93rd, 94th floor. I skipped about a half dozen really shitty jokes along the way in there, but that's the nutshell background.
Thank you for skipping those. They're starting to hurt when you hear them for the 10th or 20th.
Yeah. They get old. Yeah, and I'm fortunate I have a lot of repeat business, and I watch the cringe, and I base it on a percentage of who's returning customers to who are new training partners to how many of the stupid jokes I tell. I'm like, all right, we're gonna go from 6 down to just 2. This is like a 2/3 class. So yeah, it's a con. Listen, you gotta know your training partners. You got to read them as you go.
Andy and I are nodding in agreement because he's been listening to my same shitty jokes for the past 8 years or so, man. just recently.
Yes.
All right, I'm going to retire some of these because we're getting the same student cycling through, and I'm
Yeah.
like, it's the same jokes.
Yeah, I'm hitting that, and I'm also hitting the I'm old now. So when I say that I'm approaching the 3-decade mark in the game and hitting the I'm much too old or much too young to feel this damn old kind of zone, and some of my timely references no longer resonate with my training partners in their mid-20s and young officers that are younger than my kids. And, I make references to certain things that should just be in general Americana that are no longer in general Americana as I understand them. So if I cut a Godfather line and you don't understand it, I automatically have problems with you. And there's several other things and references you just should know as an American. But you got to modify, you got to change.
It's a given, right? Yeah, oftentimes, and I'll tell Jeremy a little secret that he probably has never heard until tonight. So we teach concealed carry. So day one, I do pretty much most of the day. And at the end, I talk about the range day the next morning. And I say, hey, guys, no matter what, every joke Jeremy says, make sure you all laugh. I'll tell you what all the jokes are right now. That way you know what they are. So you know when they come and you can laugh. So sometimes I'll turn and I'll look at the students and I'm like, okay, laugh now. So Jeremy doesn't know that part.
The jokes are for me, though. The jokes are for me, right? I'm a very selfish comedian, right? I don't care if anybody else appreciates the joke. I chuckle on the inside every time.
Preach.
That's how I design swag. That's why I don't sell any swag for shit. I sell no swag. I design t-shirts to entertain me, and if that means it's a obscure movie quote, or if I'm quoting the Leroy Jenkins video from internet fame, if it entertains me, I'll make a t-shirt out of it. And then I give all of them away because nobody buys the damn things. But that's cool.
That's awesome.
That's perfect. Hey, Kent, tell us a little bit about you. You've been on the show before. What the hell are you doing here, man?
Man, I get to do my favorite thing in this business, and I just get to talk about being a student. So my name is Kent. I run Green Mountain Defense, firearms training company here out of central Pennsylvania, but we're not here to talk about me or my business tonight. We're here to talk about my experiences with Phil as a student of his. So, a lot of guys in the industry talk about, hey, go out and be a student, always be a student, all this stuff. A lot of folks actually do it. And Phil has been a student on the line more times than I can count in classes that I've been in. And I've had the pleasure of AIing for him once. He fired me because he hates AIs. He doesn't ever want to have any AIs. He's really a true lone soldier. But I've trained under him a bunch. He and I met I was a student in a rifle class his first year of getting off the ground with his new venture, Vigr. And I immediately saw a passion in the guy, and he was really pushing training. And it was nice to see somebody else with that level of passion, and we've stayed friends ever since. So if he needs somebody to come on here and vouch as his student in a class, I'm certainly happy to do it for him. You guys should all go train with him. Look, I could be serious on a podcast when it's not mine.
That's impressive.
Did you see that? It's incredible.
Really good.
It was incredible. Man, I don't think we've had a student guest on here that was a student in the instructor's first class. I want to go down that road a little bit, man. Let's talk about the evolution.
First year.
Oh, his first year.
First year. I don't think it was his first class.
Yeah. That was my first at the time. What do I call that? R3 defensive rifle. That would have been the first run of it with that business. Certainly not the first time I taught a rifle class, but yeah, you were in an inaugural run. You might have been in the first AVD of the first vehicle. Huh. I've been in one of the early ones that was taught with this business. Now that course was born almost 20 years ago now. The backbone of that course is about getting onto, it's 20 years. It'll be 2004 was when I first ran some variation of a lot of that content, although it's evolved wildly since then.
Nice. I want to dig into the evolution of kind of Phil as the instructor. What are some of the noticeable changes or landmarks, I guess, because Phil mentioned that he's been doing this for several decades now. So to kind of have that perspective with the student that's known him and kind of trained with them over the better part of those last decades, what are some of the things that stand out to you that kind of have drawn you to him and kept you coming back?
Something that stands out to me a lot is his ability to relate to different audiences. Obviously, the guy's got a law enforcement and military background, and I'm neither of those things. So I've taken for example, since we're talking about vehicle, I've taken other vehicle classes where the dude's in front of me and he's like, y'all know about a felony stop, right? And I'm like, no, I in fact know shit about felony stops. I don't do this. What are you talking about? Like, so context is important to me, and his ability to relate. A class like vehicle is it's situational dependent. There's a lot of, hey, skinny pedal on the right is your first option. You want to get the fuck out of here if you can. There's a lot of talking about life. So I've seen Phil relate that to a law enforcement guy on the line with me, and then relate it to me and immediately make a switch and start talking about Walmart and the wife in the grocery cart versus doing the work thing. That's not easy to do for some folks. So I've seen him relate his content enough to different audiences that it's impressive. I mean, shooting is shooting, as a lot of guys say, but some of this stuff that gets a little more situational and a little more in depth, you can get lost in a rabbit hole if you're not careful. So that's one of my kind of favorite things.
Yeah, context definitely matters. So Phil, let me ask you about that. When you do your courses, do you do Leo only, or do you do a civilian only, or a mix? That way you can have the content kind of make sense for guys like us that are not former law enforcement.
Yeah, so I have two different programs. So I have my open enrollment program is called Vehicle, and then I have a law enforcement only program called Armed Vehicle Defense. Originally, they were both called Armed Vehicle Defense. I would just separate them as open enrollment and law enforcement, but I realized that I didn't want anyone to think they were the same class, because kind of like Kent mentioned, one of my big core principles is delivering contextual training, and not, I know that there are all the types of training out there, and there's entertainment, and there are courses you go to just because we're in the lifestyle we want to, and there's no problem with that. I have no problem with putting on gear and I'll drop down some nods and I'll relive some glory days and have fun. And I'm not doing that anymore. That's not my life anymore. But if I want to enjoy myself, spend a weekend and a couple $1,000s, it's no different than if I put on a Phillies uniform and go to their $10,000 3-day spring training experience. I can do the same thing. But I think it's problematic when trainers mix the two and mix that entertainment and sell it to you as context, and just tell you that, well, hey man, listen, if this works for CAG or Dev, it'll work for you. Well, yeah, but yes, and also no. So I think context is really important. So I have split programs. Cops are welcome in my open enrollment, and in fact, most classes I get, probably a quarter of the open enrollment personnel will be law enforcement, but the course is taught from an armed citizen perspective. If I have a chance at a break and I have a relative point I can give a cop, I'll pull them to the side, but the course is going to remain solely focused on, hey, you're in your car, you're carrying concealed, you're heading home, you're heading to the bank, you're heading wherever you're going, and this is the situation you're working with. So I think context is one of the most important things I can deliver. So I have split programs for it, two completely separate curriculum. There's some crossover, of course, but most of it is very specifically geared towards the realistic expectations. I hate to even use the word mission, because it's not nobody rolls to Home Depot with a mission. I'm going to get some, I'm on my 7th trip this week because I'm got a home renovation project going. I'm not planning an operation at Home Depot. I'm going to pick up the screws I don't have. So it's not even realistic to say mission, just living your life, versus if I'm training a military unit, well, then I might be able to use those terms and they're more applicable. So I think it's important to split, share what's important, share the commonality. Some of the tactics or some of the physical skills are similar, or taught similar. But beyond that, I think it's important to split.
That makes sense. Dan asked, ask Phil about the genesis of AVD or vehicle. So we mentioned we had Kent talk about the evolution of you as an instructor. What about the course itself, right? From your early days to where it's at now, what are some of the big landmark changes that you think have really helped?
So some big things for me, I started off teaching vehicle-based tactics as a young police officer to other police officers. And as I look back on my old programs, I always say this, I'm not embarrassed at anything I taught 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 or 20 years ago, or whenever it was. But I look back at it and go, man, I didn't have based on the information I know now, I wouldn't teach that again. I would look at that and go, what? I disagree with that dude. Phil today disagrees with Phil of 5 years ago on certain topics, 20 years ago on many topics. So it started off as a law enforcement class, as a vehicle-based, and it was just me before I was honestly ready. I didn't have enough time in the street, trying to jump in and give something more than most officers were. And a lot of that was coming out of my military experience. So just teaching some of the stuff that I had learned, work around non-armored vehicles from the military, and then transitioning that into law enforcement work. And then as that began to evolve, there were periods of time where I wasn't teaching the class. I'd work for other companies and I'd be around vehicles. I'm going to training, picking up stuff for myself. And then I get into the private sector once I leave law enforcement full-time. And now I'm teaching both law enforcement, and I'm now teaching a lot more open enrollment stuff. So I decided I wanted to develop a program around vehicles and open enrollment. And my early evolution of those programs, they were still separated, but it looked too much like the military, or it looked too much, like my law enforcement program. There's too much emphasis on fighting inside out, on starting off inside the car, whether that means we immediately get out, which is, if the car's not mobile, usually our best option anyway. But there's too much emphasis on that. There was a lot of time spent starting in the cars, being in the cars, as opposed to being around vehicles, and just the general situations. And then as I continue to build the program, I take it as a point of importance that every couple of years, at the most, no more than going about 2 years, I sit down and do a serious audit of the program. Is this still the best information? Have we seen trending? Have we seen anything that would be better? In my own experience teaching, as I continue to train, as I continue to watch, and I think it's important to watch and debrief real events and take the information from that. One of the advantages, you can look at it as a pro or con, is we live in a filmed society now. One of the pros to being involved in a film society, we lose that privacy, but we gain as trainers so much more information to apply. So as the program continued to evolve, I think it got more relevant. I think it got more realistic in terms of what really happens and what are the common attack vectors. How do we get assaulted? How do we get robbed? What does assaults around vehicles that stem from road rage look like? What does it look like when large groups of people try to take you out of a car, whether the car is mobile or not? And really began to hone in on some of those common events where individuals are attacked, whether it's a carjacking, whether it's a domestic, and which is a really, really common attack vector, where it is someone that's assaulting you. It just happens to be in or around a car. And what does that look like? And starting to try to train those things, as opposed to just generic, for lack of a better term, and something I never did. I pride myself on having never really done with even law enforcement crowds. The military schools where you go to a vehicle class, and I always kind of cringe and chuckle at the same time. If anyone yells contact front at any point in a open enrollment vehicle class, then I just kind of scratch my head and go, okay, cool. So like we're rolling around and we're contact front and everybody's bailing out and guns are firing everywhere and we're laying down base of fire and we're maneuvering. Okay, that's rad, man. So, but that's not real, and it's not applicable. So I stayed away from that. I never got into that game. But I think as I evolved the program became sharper and more realistic, more grounded in actual relevant crime that occurs to us. And then how can we train, understanding the very limited resources we have with cars. It's very rare we get to roll a car out and plop a car in a range and blast it up. It just doesn't happen much. So what drills can we work on? What skills that we can do in the range, be it through dry fire, through live fire, through force on force, through anything we do, what skills can transfer and help us out? So that's really where the program's evolved. The final evolution, I think, for me was with open enrollment programs with Vigr training. Force. And that's now expanded into about a solid third of the vehicle program is applied tactics, and you get to gun it out. And it's not going to be a guess. Does this work? You're going to see. I always tell people, don't listen to anything I say. Don't believe anything I tell you. Let's shake it out and let's check it. Once we get the UTM out, then kind of all the bullshit washes away, and we're going to see what works and what doesn't work. And that's your time. That's your time to try. Hey, do you think making the hero run is going to work for you? Well, let's see. Is this position going to be better? Is trying to do this going to be better? Let's work it out. That's what the range is for. That's what training is for. And then we're going to talk about it, debrief it, and let you go on to the next event. And worst thing you get is, a couple little UTMB stings and a little bit of a lesson, and you're better for wear.
That makes sense. So obviously there's a vehicle at some point in this course. What other gear does a student have to have?
Yeah. So all they need, it's basically like imagine a very low round count class. I mean, you're looking at, most people shoot less than 200 rounds in the class. It's a relatively low round count. All of the force on force gear, equipment, ammunition, all that's covered in tuition. So really it's your standard loadout. It's ammunition, Iron Ear Pro, some long sleeves, and a pair of gloves, and you're covered.
Nice, good deal. We had a little bit of roboting at the beginning of part of that deal. Is this more of a force on force? Is there a larger force on force component than this, than the live fire, or kind of how's the course balance between the two?
Yeah, so the way it shakes out is the standard format is a 2-day class. So day one is all live fire. So day one, we're going to work in and around vehicles. There will be live fire drills. There will be a short ballistics laboratory where we're going to see what bullets do around cars. But day one is solely live fire. Day two is no live fire. So we're going to start day two with some situational review. We're going to do some video analysis and debrief some live incidents. Take a look at that. We move into a small introductory block into vehicle-based combatives. But I always tell people it's not a combatives class. I dabble in that. I give a tease and a taste, and then I make a referral. And I make referral to the guys in the industry who specialize in blended weapons and combatives and do it, far better than I can in terms of justice and talking. I send guys to Craig. I send guys to the Shivworks Collective, any of the trainers involved with them. And that's where I send guys, and I make recommendations to go there. And then from that, usually late morning or right coming out of lunch, then the remainder of the day is force on force. So it ends up being anywhere between a quarter and a third of the overall class is force on force drills. Depends how fast the people move through the early curriculum on day two.
Nice. Ken, I want to get your perspective and thoughts on that the force on force component of it. So talk to us from the student's perspective. What does that look like? What were some of the challenges that you had with it?
First of all, I love force on force. It's one of the best things a civilian can do is go, like Phil said, shake your shit out and see if it's really working or not. I'm going to steal, all of us trainers steal from each other. So I'm going to steal from Phil and talking about his course a little bit. There's kind of two ways you can do force on force. You could turn it into the silly paintball, like whack-a-mole games and let it get all ridiculous. Or you can go the other way and make it like a bedtime story, old school NTI style. You're walking in the mall and for some reason you're carrying your wife's puppy and you've got 6 rounds at a Glock for some other reason. And you have to go save the JCPenney and go. What? No. Somewhere in the middle of that is Phil's version, which is, hey, we're going to use the vehicle. We're going to use these barriers and barricades out around the vehicle. We're going to make this sort of our stage. But what we're really doing is almost like a competitive environment of just see what your skills do. So, hey, Jeremy, you and I are up, and I'm going to be on this part of the vehicle, and you're going to be on that part of the vehicle. Phil's going to call you in scenario, and we're going to see who takes more UTM. We're going to see what works for us, and we're going to see what doesn't. And as students, I think the best thing you're learning is not just you being in the Evo, but there's a dozen of us standing around watching what's going on here. And, now Andy and Phil are going, oh, boy, Kent's going to the back of the car. That's going to work real well for him. Oh, Jeremy's going to try that hero run across to the barriers. Let's see if that – nope, he got caught. Well, look at that. Like, there's that extra perspective you see from being on the outside that's really valuable. I find it interesting that some folks, as I've seen enough of these things happen, it surprises you who does well in that environment and who you would thought would have done really, really well, and they lock up for whatever reason. It's interesting to see where mindset comes into play. And it's interesting to see who's really kind of ingested the lesson plan and, just kind of taking it from what it is. But, I mean, if you don't come out of it getting shot up, you don't learn much. You gotta try to learn something. You gotta take the approach of just like jiu-jitsu or anything else you're gonna train. Like you're gonna take a beating here for a minute to get a lesson. And nobody really won or lost, except it's super clear who won and who lost from the outside. And then there's, the bragging rights and the shit talk that goes on. But he does a great job of controlling it and keeping all the alpha nonsense in check while making it relevant. And it's an actual learning experience rather than just a silly game that we're playing for points or whatever. It's a good mix.
I want to go into that a little bit further. Phil, can you talk to us about how you get the role player to do that job well, where it's not this kind of fairy tale deal where hey, it's a gun guy, I know I'm going to go in there, and they just, how do you, and is it something that you're trying to get them into the mindset of a bad guy, or is it more of a skill versus skill thing like Kent was talking about? And how do you kind of manage that and direct that?
Easy day, no role players. So I break it down on what I call it opposed force on force. I think that there are a couple different ways you do force on force. Kent mentioned a few of them. I think that you can do them to enhance a skill. You can do what most people are familiar with, which is scenario-based force on force. That's hey man, I want you to try to go do this. I want you to put yourself in this mindset. You're the robber. You're the carjacker. You're this or you that. I'll do one or two of those in a course, but most of the evolutions are done in what I call opposed. And that is essentially where I set the playing field to elicit what's going to look like a familiar response. You might look at it and go, oh, that's carjacking. You might look at that and go, this is a road rage. This is a fender bender turned into a road rage. You can see what the setup is, but I don't set it that way. No one's a good guy. No one's a bad guy. Participant A starts in the driver's seat. Participant B starts 10 yards in front of the car in this location. On this start stimulus, whatever that is, we go. And everyone's got equal fight. There's no good guy. There's no bad guy. There's no role. There's no story. There's no, I expect you to lose because you're the bad guy and I expect you to win because you wear the white hat and you're the good guy. You're going to fight. And like Ken said, there are times where nobody feels like they won. And there are times where nobody feels like they won and everyone outside goes, oh, that dude got decimated. Like they got lit up. But it leaves equal skin. And what I found over running force and force now for a lot of years is I can count on one hand with a few fingers left over the number of times I had truly gifted role players, people that were able to suspend everything to make a better experience for the people that are training. And that's very, very tough skill to build, very tough to teach. It's one of those things where the person just has to have the right particular set of personality traits, the right maturity and mental gearing, and a lot of practice. So take all that away. And Kent mentioned jiu-jitsu, and I think that's the greatest example. I liken it to guys that you talk about, you go through your average jiu-jitsu class and you're going to drill in a cooperative manner with a partner based on the professor's instructions. And then at some point you're going to roll, and it's just going to be, you're going to slap, bump, and then you're going to try to simulate murder. And that's what I end up doing with my force and force. We're going to teach the lesson first. We're going to work through drills to enhance individual skills. And then when we pressure test that in force and force, I'm going to put you in a scenario. I'm going to set the stage. I'm going to set the start stimulus. And when I say go, you fight. And everyone tries to win. And sometimes you're the windshield and sometimes you're the bug. And that's how I leave it. And it's the easiest way I've found to elicit realistic responses, and the easiest way that I have found to validate the positive and the good tactics that we talk about, and also allow some room for self-exploration and find out what doesn't work in this context. It's not real. It's not the same. It's not a one-to-one, but it's about as close as we can get. And it's still a far cry from the real stress, but it's as good as we can get. And I found that's the easiest way. No role players, just keeps it simple.
That makes sense. Ken, talk to us a little bit about, you mentioned that, oftentimes you're surprised about who wins and who loses. What are some of the characteristics and traits of the students that I guess would surprise you when they come out on top? And then the same thing about the folks that maybe don't do as well or prevail.
I'm thinking So I'm a very visual person. So you asked me to think back to Force on Force with Phil. I thought of a person. I won't say names or anything like that, but I thought of a female student who I as just a guy in the class. I was not AIing this. I wasn't Kent the trainer dude. I was just there. I found myself a couple times having to encourage her just to. She was afraid of Force on Force. She was afraid to participate. And I found myself being the, hey, come on, this will be all right. Like, look, Landon's getting shot. He's already ugly. It'll be fine. Like, trying to make the jokes and do the thing and trying to get somebody loosened up to chill. But when she applied an open mind to it and she just kind of went, all right, so what are we trying to do here? She went out and I'm going to use his term. She decimated a way better shooter. You put the two of them on the timer, on the line. You ask them to shoot a drill, give them a B8, pick your metric. He beats her every time. Put the two of them around the car and say in scenario, and she clearly won. And it was a confidence boost, and it wasn't too much of a, Phil's not one of these guys that's gonna, stop the class and make too big a deal out of that or over emphasize her win to the point where she's leaving with false confidence, or it was nothing like that. But in that moment, I was like, no, wait a minute. That was an interesting outcome. I would not have expected to see that. And what I realized was, like, throughout the course, she was super open-minded. She didn't have any expectations of herself. She didn't come in thinking that she was any better or any worse than anybody else. She was kind of the purest form of a student. She's just there to get what she could get. So that was the incidents I was thinking of. In terms of who does well overall, it's somebody who's got the willingness to compete and they're willing to go out and try something and get smoked. And I don't have to think very hard for examples of those folks. It's most of our training partners, really, when you think about it. So that's a positive.
Yeah, there's something to be said about going out there and getting smoked. That harkens back a memory from yesterday when I went out to Tim's place and got smoked. So, Phil, I want to. So, you said the course focuses a lot on applied tactics, especially on day 2. What is the role or the function of the live fire component of that in day 1? Kind of as an instructor, where do you see that, the function of that?
Yeah, so this is an area we'll go back to, kind of kick back to one of the areas where we talked about the evolution of the course, where I think it really evolved a lot. And I think the live fire component, what that does is allows people to understand the proximity and urgency that the size of a fight around a vehicle produces. And it produces that urgency, that fast, rapidly evolving, close range fight with an object between you and your opponent when done properly, and how to manage that at speed, and to do so in an environment where far too often, if we train in vehicles, what's common is people bring out they'll roll a car into the range that they can't scratch, right? So they end up doing unrealistic movement patterns around it that are further away from the car. They extend beyond. They don't move around it or away from it or consider through it in the same manner. So just having an object that's okay to shoot, because the cars that are brought in, we Swiss cheese them by the end of the class. They're shredded. So just having that and just understanding where your angles and where your movement, what's safe about a car, where is safe on a car when we do the ballistics laboratory portion, dispelling a lot of the myths around what do bullets do around cars, using your car for quote unquote cover. That's not something we really see people do outside of a very rapidly evolving situation. But if you are in that rapid movement, what's the best place to go? What's your best path? What's your most behaviorally likely pattern of movement? Where are you going in the car? And then how do you maximize not getting shot when you're there? And being in a position to be prepared where if this is a person who is pressing attack on you is going to continue to come from, where do we capitalize on those angles? And to be able to apply that, not in theory of, say, a barricade or a stick or a Bianchi barricade or a couple of barrels stacked up, but a real car. And then it's just it comes down to the live fire portion. Then is just the tactics primarily of movement and use of cover. We don't get in too deeply in day one. We don't get into a lot of the whys or the whens. It's more of a how day. So how do I safely draw my gun inside the car if I have to? How do I safely move around with a drawn gun? How do I get out of the car? How do I manage a seatbelt if for some very odd reason I find myself in need of doing both? How do I move around that vehicle? Where are my safe places to be? And how do I get away from that vehicle if I'm no longer able to use it, or if it's no longer beneficial for me to be at my vehicle? And then we just run drills to get repetition in that. That's really about it. Where we throw the context in is in day 2. And then that's when we kind of give them the whys behind the hows. And like anything else, one of the things Kent mentioned when he's talking about who prevails and who wins in fights, to me, one of the biggest determining factors there is when you watch the people. Everything that Kent said, I would agree with. And I think it's an informed observation from an experienced instructor, and it crosses over from different types of training. But to me, another key component you see in Force and Force is it's a real checker of skill level. And those who have put in the time to have a higher level of skill in all things related to manipulations, movements, shooting from cover, doing all the little things we train in the range all the time, that's less mental bandwidth they have to apply to the swirling cacophony of tactics and noise and distraction and all the crazy shit that's going to happen in a real event. And even in a Force and Force environment, it's less they have to apply to that. Therefore, they're able to focus on the more complex task at hand. So it translates. We get the simple stuff out day 1 in live fire, the safe stuff, and also the fun stuff. I mean, I'll be straight with you. We don't do it as much anymore. I do a fairly limited amount of shooting from inside the car because there is a very limited application of that. There is some. It's there in counter carjacking, particularly in counter removal and mass unrest riot situations. There's some very slim possibility it's there, but it's fun. How many people get to shoot out of a car? How many people get to shoot a car? At some point during the class, whether they do it by accident or I physically have them do it on purpose, everyone gets to put a bullet in a car, which, if for nothing else, like I said, hey, I got no problem with having fun at training and being entertaining and doing that. I mean, that's what you do. If the range allows it, if I have a good, safe range, I can do it, and the cars are properly prepped. One of the last things I'll do is I'll let people just do a mad minute at the end of the course. I'll just let them shoot whatever they got, and we'll do a dump on it. We call it secondary ballistics lab. So here, get your blood orgy of shooting a car out. What you're going to find out is nothing like Hollywood. Nothing blows up. Nothing even breaks. Even when you shoot lights, nothing pops. You shoot tires. Nothing. It's boring as shit. But you get to go nuts and you can shoot the hell out of a car.
There was a fire that one time.
Now, I mean, you can catch cars on fire, but that was stolen power tools in a car that we didn't see, and we didn't know it was in a law enforcement class in Massachusetts, and they had them hidden inside the trunk. And we did the mad minute at the end of that class, which in law enforcement classes, they have a rifle component, so they get to do it with rifles as well. So we had about 20 guys online, each with a mag, and they mag dumped into this car, and it was smoking a little bit. And I'm like, yeah, guys, it does that. Same as airbags going off and crashes. Everybody thinks cars are on fire. Now it's just the airbag. It's cool. And the dude's like, nah, I feel we think it's on fire, man. I'm like, it's smoke. It'll settle. It's just dust. It's cool. And the one dude's like, yo, I can see flames through the holes. I'm like, what? Yeah, it's on fire. We probably better call the fire department. And by the time they got there, they were lithium batteries. We tried with our extinguishers. You're not putting those fires out. And it cranked, and we burned it to the frame. And it was pretty cool. The fire department got a training day. We got to take the coolest class pictures I've ever taken in the course because we all quick huddled up at the end of the class. We all got everybody in line real quick, and everybody points at the flaming car in the background. It was rad. So it happens.
That's
It
awesome.
happens.
Yeah, we took a vehicle defense course years ago. And that's one of the things, like, hey, don't put anything downrange that you're not willing to shoot, man, or get shot. Phil, what would you say was, as an instructor who was taking that course as a student, what were some of the lessons that you learned from Phil's teaching style that maybe influenced your own style of instruction?
You know something? He really, really has fun with this. He really has fun with this. The dude is a litany of movie quotes and silliness and Die Hard references. I recently had the pleasure of spending some like elongated time with him at a conference, and sitting there with the dudes chopping it up, doing like on the fly food reviews and stuff. It's really enjoyable to be able to sprinkle your own personality into your living and like get to be who you are for money. Not who somebody wants you to be, but like truly who you are. And knowing him on and off the range and on and off work time, it's the same dude. But there's for sure a little more attention to detail and effort and focus. And when the lights are on and it's time to make money, it's time to do work and be a professional. But boy, does he have fun doing it, and it shows. And that's coming from somebody who can switch from silly to serious pretty fast myself. I recognize that in other people, but it's cool to see just how much of his personality comes through in his training, and how somebody who could be like, look at him, he's sitting in a freaking bunker full of nods and breaching tools and God knows what else. Like, you saw that guy in the range, my wife would go train with him and be like, holy shit, who's this dude? And in 5 minutes, he's making a movie reference. And you're like, oh, all right. So this isn't just Sergeant Slaughter, the killer, super awesome door kicker guy. There's some heart and soul to this. And that's something that this industry needs a whole shitload more of. That's something I've always respected in him. So it's certainly something I try to emulate. Absolutely.
What were some of the other observations that you made, maybe with some students in there? Like, you used to ask, like, hey, what's the most challenging part of this course for other students? So kind of in that same vein, what are some of the things or challenges that other students typically have?
For a lot of students, this seems like it might be their first ever force-on-force experience. So if that's the case, the attitude and the mood definitely changes when it's abundantly clear that it's now force-on-force time. Like, it was a good idea. We signed up for it. We paid to get on the roller coaster. We're all happy about day one. This is going to be great. And then we roll in, and it's like, oh shit, that guy's getting out like face masks and gloves, and like, this is about to be real. And there's definitely that like shit just got real moment for folks. And Phil does a great job of transitioning if you haven't seen force on force done right, there's a huge lead up and safety component that needs to happen. Every piece of ammo needs to be all the way the hell over there, other room, other county, left in the classroom, whatever your physical setup allows. The students need to be checked for weapons and stuff like that. There needs to be this whole lead up and work up to make sure this works right. And he manages that transition very, very professionally. It's obvious there's a plan, and there's a sense and an aura of like, no, guys, we'll be fine. Like, I promise we'll be fine, but there's a way we have to do this. So when you see the person who's a little intimidated start to see, it's like if you got to see all the safety checks on the roller coaster before the roller coaster went live. There's an extra little level of like, oh, I mean, we're not just going to shoot each other a lot. And as they start to see that happen, they warm up. And it's no secret, like, he's kind of sort of calling people to the carpet kind of on his terms a little bit too. So he does a good job of kind of slow walking them into the experience for those that need it. And for those that, nah, screw it, pull the chute, go now. He does a good job of, putting them to the front too. That, I think, is the hardest mental part of the class. The hardest part might be bailing out of a window when you're fat.
That'd be my issue. Is there any hand-to-hand component on this?
Just an introduction. So we'll do a small block where we just introduce some base concepts to delay being removed from a car. It's not we don't whip it on, we don't get rolling. It's basically show them some simple pins, some simple bracing strategies, and like I said, it ends up being a longer commercial for other training as it is the training block itself. Just convincing guys that that's a separate subject. I used to early in my career, I would dabble with incorporating that, and I along the way kind of made the determination that once you start mixing combatives into weapons access, I'm not saying that you can't be a skilled instructor of both, but what I find is to really truly be special at either, one tends to specialize and lean heavier in one direction or the other. And the really, really good ones lean heaviest into one direction, either combatives or live fire application, while having an understanding of the other side as well. And tend to, I hate to use the worn out phrase, stay in their lane more. So it ends up being just a brief intro because I can't teach it. I couldn't teach it to the level, if you want to talk about vehicle, hand-to-hand, combatives, counter removal, pulling somebody out of a car, things like that. I use Craig Douglas as the greatest example. I wouldn't teach it 5% of what Craig would teach it. So I wouldn't do the disservice of saying I'm giving you that lesson. I'll give you 5% introduction, 10% introduction, and I'll make hopefully the connection for you to get into Craig's class or somebody else's class and make that connection and go and train with someone who really truly is an expert in that specific piece, because I think it's important and it's that nuanced and it needs that level of attention and experience to address it. So you get a teaser, you get a taste.
That makes sense. What I want to touch back on the safety side of this deal. What's the most challenging part of keeping everybody safe running a force on force?
Yeah, force on force, the biggest thing with them is the biggest areas I see people will have potential injury is just keeping them on task and knowing when it's time to start cutting the training. And what I mean by that is where I've had biggest risk of injury or the worst injuries I've had are when people in the course, they're 4, 5, or 6 scenarios deep in. We're getting to the end. If it's a smaller class and we're getting to a lot of extra scenarios, there's a shelf life to force on force. And I believe it's like a rich dessert. There's a reason why if you get a really, really rich chocolate dessert, it's only this big. It's little because you only need 3 or 4 bites. You don't need half the pie. Half the pie, you'd be like, man, I'm sick of it by this point. And the way people manifest in that is they start doing crazy shit. They start doing things that's unrealistic and they start making it look more like paintball. You start to see egos as people get comfortable with shooting each other. That ends up being the hardest thing to manage, to know when it's time to cut it. And usually by the time they get riled up to that, I finish them off where I let them unleash their inner wild man and I run them on their final scenario of the day, which is one where nobody wins and everybody wins all at the same time because it's just kind of fun. It's more of a space management, a stress management type scenario that we run at the end called Thunderdome, which is a ton of fun. Kind of like, from the movie 2 men enter, 1 man leaves. I joke around in my Thunderdome, 3 people enter, nobody leaves. So that's probably the hardest. I think the overall safety is easy if you have a solid procedure that you respect and you keep in place. And I've developed that over the years. I've seen the tragic consequences when people don't. I've walked away from trainings where the safety brief running up to force on force, we just stepped off a live fire range and we're going to step into a force on force environment, law enforcement circle. And they go, oh, hey guys, we're all professionals, right? We checked no ammo. We're good to go. Everybody's good. Yeah. All right, let's rock it. That's not enough. That doesn't work. So if you have a set procedure in place and you follow that part's easy. It's just managing the people as their expectations and their energy changes throughout the day. That's the biggest thing.
Are you able to go ahead, Andy?
Oh, I was just going to throw out there. You've mentioned quite more. Let me start that over. You've mentioned more than once about movie quotes. So when a student signs up for your class, you send them a pre-email of like, hey, this is what you need to bring. This is what time you need to be there. Do you send them like a movie list of like, hey, you need to catch up on these movies before you get here?
No.
So you know what the hell I'm talking about?
That is a hell of an idea. That would be a required. I have sent guys. I do this more in my law enforcement classes, admittedly, than my own enrollment. I have sent people home with homework assignments Like you can't, like, I'm not gonna certify you as an instructor if you don't watch this movie this week. Like you're gonna just watch this, like it's gonna happen, or else I can't do this. So
Yeah.
I've done that. That's not a bad idea. I like that. So if you watch, I could probably limit it down to about 10 flicks where you're gonna get about 75-80% of my references, and it wouldn't be a bad idea. Phil's required movie list prior to pre-training list.
That'd be pretty cool, actually.
Yeah. Oh, that's what he means by that. So I use it on the range. I used it for years in parenting. And it's funny because I got adult kids now, and they'll actually listen and maybe watch a movie I told them they should have watched their entire life, and come back and they go, "That was a movie line? We just thought that was like some smart ass thing, you and mom said to us growing up." I'm like, no, it was a movie line, and you just never knew it. So it's helpful. Listen, you come here for after action review, you get parenting tips on the side. It's all good.
No, it's appreciated. I want to before we get off the safety aspect of it, what's the bare minimum? So if one of our listeners goes out there and they're looking at force on force courses after listening to this episode, and they're thinking about taking a force on force course with a local instructor, what are some red flags that they look for? What are some things that you would say, hey, get the hell off of that range? You don't want to do that, right? Because there's a few years ago that we had that, I think it was like a citizens academy where the police officer was doing some force on force and ended up shooting a student, right?
Yeah. And we had one locally here a couple of years ago with a private training company that they ended up shooting a student. So, yeah, unfortunately, historically over the last 20, 30 years, at least LE averages about one incident every other year where someone's shot. The red flags for me, what I always tell people is, first, if it doesn't feel like there's a formal procedure, it's just like they're kind of, oh, hey guys, we'll just double check. And, you kind of get what I jokingly call the stadium pat down. They look at people and take them at their word and just kind of give them the brush. No, yeah, you're good to go, man. That's cool. If the procedure changes, so sometimes if you're going to a force and force class, it might be a 1 or a 2 day class. If the procedure is very in-depth day one, and then you come back from lunch and they're like, you guys know the drill, man. Everybody just grab your sim guns and let's get to it. That would be an automatic red flag to me. Those would be the two biggest, just none. And unfortunately, like I said, I've seen applied where there is no procedure, there's no distinction, and there's no checking. And then when procedures change and when they loosen as you go, I tell people it's one of those things with my classes. There's never going to be, I won't yell, I won't curse, I won't, if you violate a rule, if you violate one of the hard standing rules in terms of how you check into the training area and check out of the training area and the safety check procedures, then I'm simply going to ask you, you're going to leave the training area. I don't care if you put up a folding chair at the edge of the training area and watch. I'm not going to scream. I'm not going to, throw you off the range, tell you get out of my face. I don't want to see you. I'm not going to belittle you. I'm going to quietly pull you off to the side, and people are going to know because you're going to be watching from 90 yards away at the end of the day, sitting in a folding chair watching the rest of the class. And that's 100%. That stays from day one through the entirety of training. So those would be my two big red flags. No firm procedure, and when the procedure changes and loosens as the training time goes on.
If I may add to that, something I saw just recently is if the procedure is different depending on who it's applied to.
Yeah, that too.
That's a big that bothered the shit, and we shut her down. Right? It was all, I know this guy. He's cool. First of all, no, he's not. He's demonstrated to us numerous times he's not cool. In fact, and also, hell no.
One of the most common ways that bad incidents happen in the law enforcement training circle is guys that don't have the maturity or the discipline to tell someone to get out of the area and go away, and politely tell, hey chief, hey sheriff, hey sir, hey captain, colonel, whoever it is, hey, no, you're not coming here. And if you insist on throwing your rank around to step forward to this area, I'm going to call a ceasefire and everything's going to stop. I'm going to stand there and look at you until you leave or adhere to the policy. Because no, you're not coming in with the gun you have on your hip, even though you're not participating, because it's just not going to happen. And unfortunately, those communities, when I tell most of my horror stories about misapplication of safety and force on force, it's from the military and law enforcement communities. It's the same as anything else. The more they do it, the more routine it becomes, and then we just start pencil whipping and checking the box. Now we're good. We got this. And the moment that happens is the moment bad shit happens. So it's one of those areas to put everyone that trains with me at complete ease and calm their minds. I make an environment where I tell them, guys, it's not, I can't promise you no pain in this environment. I can't promise you that you won't have a boo-boo when I need a Band-Aid to cover up a finger that gets a little bleeding ouchie on it. But what I can promise you is a safe training environment. You're going to be safe. No one's going to get shot today with anything other than UTM. You're going to be completely safe and nothing bad is going to happen. And then set that up to put their mind at ease that they never question it. They never have a feeling or a thought, I'm in any danger of being shot or being harmed. And that's a real fear. I mean, some people come to that and they'll ask me, I'll get questions leading up to classes and it's reasonable. And I'll get people that'll pull me off to the side and go, I'm nervous about this. Like, are people really going to shoot like guns at us? And I try to set that environment that it goes out of their mind and never comes back in.
Hey, Phil, just for funsies, have you ever had that experience where you're teaching a Leo course and you have somebody that's of higher rank that tries to come in and kind of boss their way around?
Oh yeah, I'm fortunate in my career, I never had one who was an asshole about it. I've had some higher ranking folks that drift in and oh no, it's cool. I'm just gonna stay here in the back and watch. And I said, yeah, that is cool. You can stay and watch. If you go back to your car, take your gun off, come back up, we'll check you, we'll mark you, we'll put whatever the marking we're utilizing for that training environment. And then I'd love for you to say, the more you stay and watch this training, the better off you are. Unfortunately, I can't have you stay if you're not willing to do that. And in my experience, as long as you pitch it tactfully and professionally, I've been fortunate enough that one of two things happen. Either the lousy supervisors don't want to put up with hassles, so they just huff and leave. The good supervisors who want to see what training is occurring will actually respect you more for following the safety protocol and go and do that. So I never had the nightmare scenario, but I've talked to dudes who've had the issue and had guys trying to throw their weight and their ass around and, either do this or we're going to have a problem. We're going to have to talk about this. As long as you're not an insubordinate, I think it goes a long way.
That makes sense. I want to kind of expand on that conversation a little bit with Kent. So Kent, a long time ago, you signed up for Phil's class and it was in his first year of instruction. What was that decision-making process that you went through that you would recommend for students, specifically in the context of a force-on-force course or a class that has that component, right? We talked a little bit about the red flags. How can somebody find a good instructor that's going to keep them safe and the education is going to be beneficial in their area?
So I came to Phil first in a rifle class. So I did not just jump into Phil's force-on-force first. That's too many F's. I showed up to a rifle class first, and I kind of like got the cut of his jib, so to speak. Figured out who he was in a more sterile a more normal, static range, square range rifle class environment. And that my experience with him led me to believe, like, hey, this guy's probably pretty squared away in terms of other more dynamic training. And then I followed through with that as is my interest. For the I'm going to say the layman, for somebody who doesn't do this for a living themselves, first of all, vehicle should probably not be the first class you ever take from somebody. I don't like if you're Susie Carry Gun who just bought a Smith & Wesson M&P 2.0 this week, and you need a training class, vehicle probably ain't it. If you've never shot that gun, if you don't know how to run it, if you don't have experience on it, I think Phil could probably get you through that. I think he probably will tell you that he has once or twice got some very inexperienced people through a course work like this. But I think you're doing yourself an injustice. I don't think that's real. I think you're probably more real to be, hey, I've taken 2 to 5 other courses from somebody, and I'm ready to dip my toe in more dynamic water. Let me look into some stuff, right? Maybe you've had a med class by this point. Maybe you've had a level 1, level 2 pistol class. Maybe you've done some competing. Maybe you have some semblance of how to run a gun. And now you're looking for like a quality experience. Hey, who who else has this guy trained with? Who else is this guy trusted by? Does he have a background teaching cops? Does he have a background, some affiliations, associations? A great example coming up, right? Phil's going to be presenting at TACCon this coming year. So a few hundred of you are going to have an opportunity to get a 2 or a 4 hour block with him to kind of figure out who he is and what he's got going on. I think you should take those opportunities when you get them. I'm not big on just jumping in cold like that. That said, I mean, we're all podcasters here except Phil. He just does TED Talks. I mean, there's a ton of these podcasts out with great information. My show, your network. Man, it's most people don't fall through the cracks. Like terrible information doesn't make it onto these streams that often. It does happen sometimes, but it's pretty rare somebody fakes the funk well enough to get invited onto one of these things and really sell their wares. So, have they been interviewed in this capacity? Just all the things that you should do in your due diligence. And obviously, like it'll be apparent to you when you train with a professional that they've got their shit together when it comes to the coursework. If you're on Phil's range for 30 minutes, it's apparent there's a plan. The equipment's there. The investment in the safety gear is there. The expenditure of having a vehicle that we can destroy is there. I mean, there's all kinds of business logistics that goes into this that people don't think about. And if somebody's got their shit together well enough to have that all done, he's done it once or twice before. So those are kind of my key points of what I'm looking for when I'm trying to evaluate somebody else's program. And that's how transparently, that's how I hope I'm being evaluated. That's what I want people to be looking into when they're looking at me as well. So, I hold people to my own standards.
That makes sense. And that's kind of how my, thought process on who I want to train with has evolved through the years. Right. And I mentioned it before, how when I first got into this thing, right, there was this big list of people that I wanted to train with. And then it got really, really, really small. And then it started to expand once I started picking up on some key patterns of, hey, this guy is a well-respected dude in the industry, and he's recommending and working with these other folks. And now there's like this undercurrent of just this professional relationship that is kind of flowing throughout the industry. And I think at this level, right at that level, it starts to weed out some of those bad actors that just can't hang, right? Like what is the old economics term, right? Like the market will cure it, right? Like the free market will cure it. What the cream will rise to the top, and then the rest will fall to the wayside. I want to get both of your opinions on where this course should fall in a student's continuum of training, and I feel like there are going to be similar answers, but let's. I kind of want to get both thoughts on this.
Yeah. So what I recommend for folks is that this is once their basic handling is down and they're comfortable with that, they can draw from concealment. They've taken a course. Hopefully at this point they've taken something. They've been through somebody's handgun level 1 who showed them basics of simple movement, how to safely draw their gun, reholster their gun. I don't have to walk them through if they have a malfunction. I don't have to walk them through and teach them how to do that. And I won't. I mean, it's not something I'm going to take a block and go teach them how to clear this malfunction. The basic handling, the further you are in that progression, the more you'll be able to focus on everything else in the course, and the more you'll get out of the course. I've given up on prerequisites, as I think a lot of trainers have, having fixed firm prerequisites and saying this is what you must, because they're very unreliable. And I have the same tale I'm sure everybody's had with that. Fortunately, for the most part, it's not usually a problem. Every now and then, I've had 2 people I've had to excuse from the class who just, hey, I just bought this last week and I don't even know how to load it. Well, then this isn't the class for you. Like I can't. But I've had some folks that were real low skill level, that I was able to modify and slow things down enough to give them something. But at the end of the day, those people never get as much out of the class. Someone who has their base defensive skill set in place. It's not a good first class, although every now and then I get folks who do come. It's not a good first class, but it also isn't one where another big misconception is you have to have a high level of tactical acumen. You must be, I have to have a 2-page long list of trainers I've trained with before I'm going to try something like this. That's not the case. If you can safely handle your gun and you are ready to add some context to your training, then you're ready for this class. It's applicable and it's appropriate for you. And everybody, what I find is everybody will get something different out of it. And I've had multiple people come through the class multiple times, and they will tell me each time, because they've seen some things before, because maybe they progressed further in their own training cycle, they were able to get something different out of it. But as long as you're safe, then I can work with you. And if I do my job correctly, I'll give you something in this class. I'll give you a takeaway that makes you feel like your time was well spent for that weekend and your energy was well spent with me. So that's the biggest thing for me.
Here, I'll even give you a Phil Groff quote for this one. Focus on the 80%. Don't focus on the top 10% of the students, and don't focus on the bottom 10% of the students. So that's something I learned through him and from my experience. I'll put some more, rather than talking about how many classes or what classes you should or should not have taken. I'm going to say this: if you can shoot a competitive stage or 6 or 8 without getting DQ'd at a USPSA or an IDPA match, you can certainly take this class. If you can function your gun without a third party helping you at any point, you can take this class. If your marksmanship and gun handling skills are decent enough that doesn't have to be your focus, you'll get more out of this class. You can take it, but it's just a matter of what you'll get out of the course. So I would say this should not be somebody's first ever. But no, to his point, you don't have to be, Andy having everybody's patch in the world on his wall to be able to come to, like, that's not real either. Somewhere in the middle is real. If you look at it and you think you can do it, you can probably do it. And I'm pretty well certain Phil will get you through it. And, he's not going to baby you. And like to his point, he's not going to take you aside onto a side berm during lunch and do ready up drills. But he's also, not going to let you hurt anybody else either. So step off the ledge, like give it a try. I'm bullish when it comes to that. You're only going to figure it out by trying. So if you're on the precipice, if you're sitting there going, well, I don't know. If you have any reasonable self-assessment of your skills and you think you'd be all right, you'd probably be all right. Show up.
Getting towards the end of it, we're already past the hour. Phil, we get quite a few instructors that tune in and listen to these podcasts episodes. So for an instructor out there that's or somebody that has access to a gun range, what are the requirements for somebody to host this course?
Yeah, real simple. I need one vehicle, preferably 2 if I can get 2. It's great. I need the permission to be able to shoot from, around, and into that vehicle on the range, with proper preparation of the vehicle, and I go over that with hosts. If there's a cost involved in that, I mean, we talk about that. I can take care of that. That's pretty reasonable, and I certainly give hints about where to get vehicles. But sourcing the car and having the permission to do it is the most important thing. Beyond that, the permission of the range to conduct force-on-force training. So that would be the other. Beyond that, I can function this. I've done this class in 20 by 20 berms, 20 by 20 bays that were tiny. I don't need a lot of space. It's a collapsed, condensed, closed course. Other than that, if it is beyond my drive range, so if it's beyond an 8-hour drive from South Central Pennsylvania from me, and I'm flying to you, if you have use of steel, steel is great for day one. If you don't, that's okay. I've been to ranges where the extent of their target stand was some sharpened furring strips that we pounded into the ground, and we rocked and rolled. So really pretty simple. Get me cars, get me a range where I can do my thing and force, and I can bring the program to you. From that, I take care of registration, take care of everything else, just get you to help me spread the word in your area, get the course filled up. I take care of my hosts, get you in for some free training if that's what interests you. If not, if it's something cooperative or reciprocal, we can do that. So I'm pretty flexible on that, but I definitely take care of my hosts and make sure you get some good training value for it for yourself, and help me get some bodies in the class and have gun will travel.
What's your favorite class to teach?
My favorite class to teach is my law enforcement firearms instructor program that I teach. So I teach that. It's I don't know that's my favorite. Let me back that up. My most fulfilling. Probably my favorite is this class, is the 2 vehicle class. It's just because shooting cars is a ton of fun. You get a lot of great reaction out of it. I would have to say that is my favorite. Fulfilling would be my firearms instructor class, just because it's my chance to hopefully influence the next generation of instructors to not be the status quo steaming pile of crap that a lot of red-shirted firearms training programs spit out across the country now, but to make better instructors, to make better coaches, and have people do a better job. So that's fulfilling, but fun. This one's a blast. Hard to knock. Like I said, hard to have a bad time around cars, and getting to shoot cars. It's like people pay to jump in a rage room, or you go to the county fair and you get the rage car for 30 seconds. You can smash a car with a sledgehammer, and you're giving $20 to the Lions Club. I'll let you shoot it. So I go a step further. Coincidentally, also the greatest way to get cars. Contact your local salver and people who run salvage companies and tow companies. Hey, a car you're getting ready to send to the crusher, as long as it rolls, it's got some glass in it, and what I found works great. Can you bring that over to us? We're going to do some training, probably have some cops in the class. You can write it off as a tax write-off. And hey, when you're done, when you come pick it up, if you want to, you want to bring your odd 6 or your 30-30 and you want to shoot a car, hey man, I'll let you shoot the car before you leave. So more often than not, I've gotten dudes to be like, oh, yeah, I can shoot a car. You care? Can I bring this? Can I bring that? Sure, bring it along, and you can come shoot a car. And then they'll bring me a car. I let them shoot it at the end. We load it up. They drive around town for 2 hours because it's full of bullet holes, and everybody laughs, and then they put it back, and it gets crushed. I tell people it's a great value. We add lead to it, so it's more weight. So you're making money on scrap. I'm adding weight to the car. It's great.
Problem with cars in Albuquerque is they're already filled with bullet holes.
Yeah, well, that's every city I go to. That's always the joke. The salvers will go running through the shittiest parts of town and just be like, oh, some dude will pick it up, take a picture, and be like, that's another. That's what happens.
Nice, man. I'd love to have you back on to talk about that law enforcement instructor course at some point in the near future. I feel like that'd be a great conversation.
Sure.
Before we wrap it up here, I'm gonna end with the laziest question in podcast, and I'm gonna ask. I'm gonna kick it over to Kent first. And Kent, what should we have talked about with this class? Is there anything that we should have covered about this class that we haven't, or Phil?
Man, I think you did a pretty good job. Phil does a good job selling himself. You're not missing anything, man. No, you're really not. I think you're good.
Sweet. Phil, is there anything that you think we should have talked about that we haven't covered yet? I just don't want to miss anything.
No, I think we talked about the course thing. We covered it pretty well. We hit on the points. The biggest thing I would have said that I would have been worried to miss it would have been the inclusivity. Telling people no matter where they're at in the skill level, if they're safe with a gun and can run a gun, it's a decent class to give a shot. But Ken covered that pretty well, and you guys set that question up. I think it worked out.
Sweet. I'm going to kick it over to Andy, and then we'll give you all the rest of your night back.
Yeah. So, Phil, how many of these classes a year do you usually run? Do you have a schedule for 2024 yet?
Yeah, I do have my 2024. So on the open enrollment side, like I mentioned, a big chunk of my business is LE. I'm actively seeking open enrollment hosts. Right now, I have one scheduled here local to me, and it's already sold out. So at this point, I am actively seeking additional hosts for this class and any of my other open enrollment programs. I think I'm getting close to 50 already on the books for the year, but the majority of those are LE. So I got weekend availability. So I'm actively looking. Unfortunately, I can't even point to, hey, go sign up for this class here in this town, because the one I got sold out. So what I would say is any way you contact me, social media, through my website, give me any kind of a shout. If you're interested in hosting, I would love to talk to you about it, and I would love to see how I can be beneficial to your area and see what I can do to help you out and maybe get a class over towards you guys or towards anybody that's interested in it. So just give me a shout. I'd be happy to talk about it.
Very cool. So if you instructors out there, reach out to Phil and get that on the books. And if it's somewhere close to us, maybe I can get into one of those classes. You know, Jeremy mentioned it, and I won't go too much into detail. Jeremy and I took a vehicle class here a few years ago, and the whole time for me, I was afraid of shooting the truck, and I ended up shooting the guy's truck. And this instructor, this was his daily driver truck, so I put a hole in it, and it didn't go very well at all. And so I need to kind of break that mold of being able to go and take a class where I get to shoot it and not feel bad about it. So I think
listen,
cool.
just for a side comment on that. I mean, I know I can just tell you this. Don't feel bad at all. If he chose to put that out there, then that's on him, man. 100%. That's the wrong way to do business. And I would offer that word of advice to him as an instructor. That's not the way to do this type of training. But if he chose to go for that, then hey, man, that's what you pay your insurance premium. So
yeah.
Okay, man. Yeah, I'd feel 0.0 bad about that. It's going to happen.
Two things, right? Don't put it down range if you're not willing to have it shot. And then the instructor is responsible for 100% of what happens on the range.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm mostly over it, but you could tell, like, you know, kind of got a little blister in the back, you know, just little tick every now and then. But anyway, I appreciate you both coming on, Ken and Phil. I'm going to TACCon with my son-in-law. Actually, I got chosen to be RSO this year for the first year, so I'm super excited about that. My son-in-law's coming with me, the first TACCon he's gone to, and so I put in for your fighting movement class. So, you know, fingers crossed that I'll be in your class.
Awesome.
And I'll get to say hi to both of you guys. So anyway, where can we find you again? Tell us about your website.
So Vigr Training, vigrtraining.com, and on the relevant socials, just as Vigr Training.
Awesome. Thanks, guys, for coming on.
Thank you.
And then Kent is greenmountaindefense.com, guys. Thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. It was an awesome conversation. We really appreciate you sharing your time and your evening with us. Same thing to our listeners. Thank you for tuning in tonight. Remember, it's your life, it's your safety and protection, it's your responsibility. Y'all stay safe, and we'll see you next time.